microphone? Seeing
All right.
none, I will close public comments. Perfect, too. First take was good, but some people actually hear it. All right, take two. So we're going to officially log into this meeting at 6:01 tonight. Today, please make a note of the minutes if we're on time. It is not my fault that we were a minute late. So we're going to start tonight. Before we take public comment, which we know that we don't have any here in-house, this meeting is available to watch via Zoom, and going forward, for the rest of our meetings for the foreseeable future, we will have a public comment feature enabled on Zoom as well, so that if you are at home and are unable to make it to a meeting in person, you will be able to comment and share thoughts during the public comment sessions for future meetings. We'll just finalizing some of those plans now and getting everything set up to be able to do that. So look forward for that coming down the pike here later on this month with meetings that we have. In the meantime, you can view this here tonight, and then going forward, you'll be able to make comments via Zoom. You can view it on Zoom, but also on YouTube as well, correct, Adam? It is broadcasting on YouTube Live, and obviously you can follow up with it after the fact to rewatch the meeting or rewatch things that you need some clarification on. So
well, it's not live on YouTube, it's published on YouTube.
Right. Thank you for the clarification. So published on YouTube to watch later. So before we go to our first agenda item, I will open it up for public comment. Seeing none, I will move on to our first item on the agenda tonight. This should be a quick one. We had a petition by the Amherst Education Association to include certain teaching professionals or certain professionals in the school, mainly BCBA, behavior specialists in the school, and then social workers, to officially include them in the language of our teaching contract. This is something that has been treated that way. So BCBA professionals, social workers, they've already been treated as part of the bargaining unit anyway by default, but they've not officially been written in the text. So we had a petition to be able to include them in the written text of the contract. And the board, after getting advice from legal, decided that this was something that we were okay bringing to the board for a vote tonight. So I will open that up to take a motion to accept to edit the language of our current our contract with the AEA to include BCBA professionals and social workers as officially part of the bargaining unit. I'll take a motion from Victoria, and I'll have a second from Josh. Does anybody have any questions for Superintendent Steele on this issue before we move on and take a vote? Okay, so all in favor of this vote? To include BCBAs and social workers as officially part of the contract language, say aye or raise your hand. 4 in favor and none opposed. So Adam, we can grant that petition by the AEA, and we'll include those professionals as part of the bargaining unit, which they were already treated as anyway. So moving on. So tonight we're going to talk about 2 different items for the rest of the night anyway, up until 7 o'clock when South Eaton comes in and does the same thing. I'm going to share my screen for the first part of it. Here we go. Sorry, I have to allow Zoom to share apparently on my screen. So just bear with us. Should have done that before. Good old Apple security. All right. So you will not be able to record the conferences on your screen. So now we should be able to share my screen here in just a moment. So 2 things. Our public hearing, we have 2 public hearings coming up next week. We have a bond hearing on Tuesday night, the 11th of January, and then we have our traditional budget hearing on Wednesday night next week. That is January 12th. That'll run from 5 to 7 here at the high school. The bond hearing will run for an hour on Tuesday night. That'll begin at 6 p.m. So this is the first of the this budget presentation here is going to go through and talk about our major impact stories of how our budget is crafted, the same thing that we typically do every single year. So our job as a board tonight is just to kind of go through this presentation on a high level view, take a look at some of the main storylines that craft this budget and how the administration has come up with this budget and how the board has approved or edited the budget as we've seen fit to be able to present to the public next week. We've all had a chance to review this slide earlier. There were not a lot of questions, some minor comments on some of the wording and some comments just on some of the structure of things overall. We'll present this one. You can see it a little bit better. So ideally, there are basically 2 different goals that we had set out here. Goals that were a way competing with each other, but also complementing each other. Number 1 was to continue the main goals that we have as a district, targeting class sizes, kindergarten staffing, restructuring some of that model, increasing our health office support, and then continuing to support such special services, which we know take up a big chunk of our budget every year because of the diverse services and comprehensive services that we are able to offer. The other part of this was investing in our facilities, and as we'll talk about really specifically in just a little bit, but on the high level now is we have a bond on the ballot this month or this year for a major renovation in addition to the elementary school and a major renovation to Amherst Middle School to be able to fit long-term future needs that were recommended by JFAC, reviewed by the board, and have been really underway in terms of planning for the last couple of years here in the district. We also have added a solar technology bond on there to equip our buildings with solar capabilities. And then the last thing we have that will really be targeting our budget is a 4-year contract agreement that we have with the Amherst Education Association, and voters get a chance to pass those cost elements on voting day on March 8th. So this is a look at some of the highlights of the warrant articles people will get to vote on: the budget, capital facilities fund, which will continue to fund our rainy day savings account for buildings, and the teaching contracts, the bond for the school, and the bond for the solar technology. We've already looked at all the language for the actual bonds. This gives us a look at the high level of what the operating budget is this year and what the operating budget is next year. And it's right now a 4.1% increase. And in this slide, as we go through, gives you a chance to look at some of the ways that that budget is impacted. Special services, obviously, being a big chunk of that, and then AMS, a large chunk of that as well. The 1.2 million increase, those two line items take up nearly 3/4 of the 4% increase that is actually on the budget for this year. Just comparing the general funds to food service and grants, and again, we'll talk about these in depth during the presentation on Tuesday, Wednesday night of next week. Class size ratios, and then the proposed staffing changes. These this year aren't as affected as they normally are because we are not adding any regular education teachers. We're focusing this year on a couple of special education teachers, a psychologist, a speech pathologist, and a couple of these positions they're all required positions, but a couple of these have been added in there because they were previously grant funded. So because they're required positions, they are now moving on into our budget because we have to have them as part of the special programs services that we do provide. There is a big negative number there for these kindergarten paraprofessionals restructuring going to part-time paras, which represents a big cost savings to the district. It is allowing us to keep an interventionist at Clark Wilkins to be able to provide enrichment to students that we've not been able to do in years past. Looking at the default budget, this is how the default ranks in comparison to what the proposed budget is. The FY23, we'll get into the default budget later on in the presentation, where how that is configured and how that is broken down. And then you can look at some of the things that were moved from the default into the proposed budget, some of the highlighting some of those items there. From there, we're going to the capital reserve expendable trust fund, $650,000 to continue to add to that, what I'm calling is a rainy day savings fund for us to be able to continue to work on school projects. And if you go forward to this slide here, you can actually see how those funds are going to be used over the next 5 years, next 6 years, really, highlighting some of the projects that are there and where that money that will put $650,000 if it passes in this year, and it's going to be part of an overall $52,000 withdrawal at the end of the FY23, and it just continues down that line where all that money is going to be going. We'll talk about the teaching contracts, the 4-year deal. These are the numbers, how they break down cost-wise, highlighting how this is really, in a lot of ways, an inflationary savings for us as well, amongst all the other things with good reported teachers and getting a contract there and not really having any animosity that we've seen in years past when there's been a lack of a contract. So it does this, but it also does have some potential serious long-term savings for us as well, without the worry about inflation, as we all know is running pretty rampant right now, and with who knows what kind of signs of decreasing at some point. Talk about the things that we do get out of there in addition to the inflationary benefits, increased educational time, health insurance, and then we'll break it down to 3% COLA for the teachers as part of that. From here, we'll have done a lot of this part on Tuesday night next week when we have the bond public hearing, so we'll be able to get up on a high level here what we're actually going to be having in Article 12. which is the construction bond, breaking down the project for AMS and then Clark Wilkins. Just again, highlighting some of the points that we'll really go into depth on Tuesday night during the bond public hearing. We'll do the same thing for the solar. We'll be able to talk about that more on Tuesday night, but this is part of the overall budget presentation on Wednesday as well. Just gives you the timeline. And then eventually get to the warrant articles, next steps, and then question and comments, and we'll open it from there. So I'll stop my share right now as we just kind of highlight running through that presentation. Fairly simple, fairly straightforward. Are there any items that everybody's had a chance to look at this? Any items that the board wishes to bring up now in terms of making sure that we hit upon? Any items that are of concern that we want to address? I know we've all looked at this budget for months and months and months, so sometimes getting a fresh look at it in a different way can be helpful. Sometimes we already know what's in there, so we're ready to go. Okay.
I just want to take a closer look at the, as Jeff Lover was calls it, the heat map for the enrollment class sizes. I think we need to make sure that year to year, we're not changing what our color coding system is. So this is what we're going to have this year. This needs to be what we have going forward. That if we're, at our goal, above our goal, so if we just need to be consistent, because I'm not sure if in the past what has happened, which I think is some of the confusion.
Yeah, Adam, can you elaborate on that? I know red for, if you look at these numbers here, all the way down from kindergarten through 8th grade, only one number, and that is in, third grade, grade 2 next year, is slated to be above the max goal that we had. So has this metric changed, do we know? Because I don't remember seeing this much red in years past, knowing that we're still under the max of where we want to be. We may not be at goal, but we're certainly below the maximum that we want to strive to hit.
Yeah, so it turns red when it's above the goal number, not the max number.
Okay.
But yeah, the numbers have not changed. The Amherst School Board about 5 years ago now, maybe 4 adopted those numbers, have not changed them until the targets.
So the color coding's been the same as well, where it's been, if it's above gold, it's going to be red, even if it's not above the max number.
I think at one point we had yellow, which is
I mean, that could be, yeah. Yeah, we use blue for below the minimum, and then red for above, and green is anywhere right around the goal.
Victoria?
In my opinion, it would be helpful if that above goal number was an above max number. Because I know that the board has a range that's been set versus, so if we're looking at, let's say it's second grade and it's 20.7, maybe the max is 22, but the goal is 20. There's a big difference between the red and the.
That should probably be yellow. So between the goal and the max should probably be yellow, and above the max should be red.
Victoria?
Talk to our marketing department real quick.
Can we talk a little bit about the kindergarten restructuring plan? I know we've spoken for several years on Ways and Means, and I've heard the board speak about the cost of paraprofessionals, and we're seeing the reduction there. But I want to ensure that we have coverage, and I don't think we've done a deep dive in a public meeting about this, but I'd love to hear about it.
Sure. So it's essentially the kindergarten restructure plan allows us to keep one of our interventionist positions that is currently federally grant funded. Next year, when the grant no longer can support that position, and the give back is restructuring paraprofessionals from having 5 full-time paraprofessionals to having, I believe, 10 part-time paraprofessional positions. The difference with the part-time positions is they'll carry the same level of benefits as a full-time position, which covers that additional kindergarten interventionist position. It also allows for guidance to be taken out of rotation for specials as well. So those two things get accomplished even, and still have savings of about $50 some odd thousand.
Is it, can I interrupt for a quick second, Victoria? Are we confident we'll be able to staff those 10 part-time positions?
Part-time positions are hard to staff, there's no doubt about that. But these are positions that have pretty ideal hours for some of our stay-at-home parents that might consider entering the workforce. So we hope so. We're going to try it. If not, we'll come back to the board to talk about that. That is going to be our attempt.
Can you explain more about the role of the kindergarten interventionist, what they've done this year and what they would do next year?
Sure, so as our kindergarten staff will tell you, the students that are entering our kindergarten over the last several years have been of much higher needs, socially, emotionally, academically, and even physically in some ways. The interventionist position that we funded has helped with all of those things by focusing on those kids who need professional intervention the most. And so from what I understand from our administration there, that position has been fairly critical in helping make sure that all of our kids are ready for first grade. And Kathleen will be able to speak much more about the position.
So I know in the past, we've talked a lot about the fact that as a district, we need to focus on enrichment. Is this position, it sounds like is helping those students who are not at grade level expectations. But by having this position, does it help the classroom teacher enrich the experience of the students within the classroom?
I don't want to overpromise that, but yes, in some ways, I would think that would be the case. But in large measure, this interventionist position is not just dealing with academic deficiencies, but other deficiencies that our students are coming to school.
So, you know, we discussed at a prior meeting, the having an interventionist at Clark opens up some time for our Wilkins interventionists to work with more students, and obviously we might have more students that need intervention at the lower level. But this year they will work with our students. Is the hope you know, obviously, what will happen with students and that hope is that this person will be able to deal with enrichment, or having this position will allow these Wilkins to have some time to work with enrichment.
I would share that hope. Josh, any questions, any comments?
Generally, I know we have a hard stop at 7 tonight. In the past, in my memory, there's often hard stops for public hearings. Is that the case? Or do we have unlimited time? Because I feel like there's a lot this year to talk about, especially if we're trying to talk about both bond and all the more.
Well, I do think that having the bond on a separate night allows us to get more in depth on that. So I'm hopeful that questions that come out for that will come on Tuesday night, and there will be minimal questions for that on Wednesday, simply because we can't devote the same amount of time to talking about that on Wednesday night. But I believe that is a hard stop, so he follows us on Wednesday night, correct?
Correct. So he does follow in the rare case where there's so much public input on Wednesday night on the non-bond issues, the board can schedule an additional public hearing. The statutes speak about the first public hearing being on such and such a date. You can have subsequent public hearings prior to finalizing the warrant articles.
But this year we actually have 2 hours scheduled for Wednesday, right? Which in the past we've only had 1 hour.
Correct.
Part of that,
It's just 5 to 7 on Wednesday.
It's really how it's worded on the website, right? We have from 5 to 7 scheduled. And then Sohegan, I think, is at 7. Usually we go after Sohegan, so like it gives us a little more grace period.
Amy's going to double check. Typically, whoever goes first, which is typically the Amherst School Board, their public hearing ends after an hour, but their meeting continues usually in the administrative conference room downstairs. Usually they relocate and continue the meeting, so there might be an overlap in the schedule because of that.
Yeah, so ours is from 5 to 7 and theirs starts at 7. We've always had seconds, so they're going to Thursdays.
Yeah, typically, you're right, it is usually Sohegan that leaves, that's why you're not going to do it. So, yeah, when they would leave, they would continue their meeting, and they would actually order the articles, even begin a deliberative session prep.
I do think it's important to know that if we needed to go beyond 6 o'clock though for this, we will have the flexibility of that extra hour in there too, because they're not starting before 7 o'clock. So ideally, we won't go right up to 6:59, so we don't delay their meeting. But
That's going to be so.
yeah,
So you do have
so 5 to 7. Okay.
And then our meeting would continue after that if we go.
I think, yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you.
Because that is different this year, I think, than it was in previous years. And I assume it's because of the amount of things that we discuss with what's going on with, at least with our stuff, there's certainly no lack of items to discuss in the public hearing. Dory?
you. My next question or comment, I guess, is about the capital reserve fund article. I think it's important for us to note that money that goes into that, if it were, if it were to pass, all the money that goes into that can be used to maintain our current buildings or could be used for future buildings. No, that's correct, right?
Correct, and it will also only be going in there out of excess. It's not a taxation item. It is an item that will go in there. Sorry, this is the wrong presentation. It's what do you call it? Thank you. I was totally drawing a blank. It's unassigned fund balance. It's not tax money that we will raise, and not money that's being appropriated.
And on those slides where there's just a discussion of this warrant article and the plan, it does say to be adjusted if bond passes.
Because again, we don't need to take that entire amount up, especially for the later parts of that project. If you look down here in the FY27, FY26, those are items that will be null and void because the project ideally will be done by the end of the end of summer of 2025. So it will be items that we wouldn't necessarily need to worry about at that point because they won't already be done.
Earned maintenance.
So in terms of presenting on Monday night, I know Victoria and I will handle the bulk of the bond stuff, as we've both been members of JFAC for quite a few years now. At that point, I don't mind starting things off here and talking about the majority of this stuff in the actual budget item. Beth, you've done an excellent job with it in the fall. Would you like to take over doing that again?
Sure.
Okay. And then would you want to go through the warrant article for the capital expendable trust fund as well?
Yep.
Perfect. I can then talk about the AEA bargaining agreements and then the construction bond. We can just hit upon that again, as we'll spend a lot of time discussing that on Tuesday night. I can certainly go over the high level there, same for the solar, and then that takes us pretty much to the end of the night. Does that work? Josh, you okay with that? You need to perform last year, so if you want to do it this year,
No,
now's the
if
time.
we were talking policy or some other thing that I've been on, then I would say I want to jump in, but we're talking about things that you guys have been more in depth with, so I have no pride in having to stand up and speak Tuesday or Wednesday. So I think this is a good plan, and I think given the time constraints, the fewer people who have to get up and talk.
Okay. Any further questions on the budget presentation before I assign homework?
No, I guess my question, are there separate slides for the bond that we're gonna look at after?
Yep, that's going to be part of the presentation. There are slides in here for the bond project for the budget presentation on Wednesday night.
Yeah.
But again, this is more of the high level, it's construction, the article language, the breakdowns, touch upon what we're doing at the elementary school, same for AMS, and then getting into the solar project. But with that, and the homework essentially is to just take another run through the bonds, the budget hearing slides, take a look at that, and any comments or suggestions you have, email them over to us so we can get with Amy and make any corrections. If you do that by the end of the day Thursday, or maybe noon on Friday, we will give Amy a few days Friday and then Monday as well to make any changes that we have so we can be prepared for Tuesday. Amy, does that work for you? Okay. Perfect. So now we will go to the topic of Tuesday night's presentation, which is the bond public hearing. And again, we'll touch upon this at a high level now because we'll certainly get in depth of it more on Tuesday, but this presentation is going to take a lot longer to go through in detail slide by slide. Victoria and I started looking at this today just to kind of outline where we were with this project. I do want to commend Victoria for doing a very good job of putting the slide deck together. It's about 50 slides long. So working with Amy and working with JFAC to get this put together was not an easy project. So thank you for doing that. Victoria and I will present on Tuesday night for this, unless somebody feels so compelled to take the place of one of us. But really this follows a lot of what we've done in the public forums and that we'll do in the next public forum on January 22nd over at AMS. It's going to talk about the overall facility projects, getting into the very high level details there. And then I'm going to go into a timeline of how we got to this point starting in 2017 with the capital needs assessment that was put together, 2018, the formation of JFAC, and then all the way up to all the action that's taking place this year with DEW, tying bonds, Banwell, hiring of architects and hiring of construction managers, et cetera, to be able to put this project to the point that we're at right now with that $83 million price tag going on the ballot in March. This will just again talk about the timeline more specifically for 2021. This talks about just going through, again, more of that timeline, what JFAC consisted of, and how we got to this point. From there, Victoria will take over, and this is really the deep dive into why we're doing what we're doing, taking a look at the existing conditions, some of our favorite slides, including our favorite office bathroom combination, some of the storage space needs that we lack, and then certainly including specialists being moved to carts as they are forced to do when we have classroom needs that go beyond our average class sizes. Existing conditions for AMS. Victoria spoke very well to this at a public forum back in December that we had over at Clark Wilkins. So she'll be able to continue to go from there, highlighting, among other things, the triangle-shaped rooms that really take away a lot of functional educational space. Talks about overall the need, why we need more space before getting into some of our class size numbers and class size goals that we've talked about for a few years now, really since 2018. When I joined JFAC, this was something that was high on the priority list, and we've certainly done a better job of getting those numbers down, but it gets tougher with the special programs and the lack of classroom space to be able to get much below where we are right now. So this will continue to highlight one of our main goals, to be able to get those class sizes down. Talks about the alignment that we'll have at the schools, how they currently are arranged, and how we'll transition to a more functional, more efficient school system with just 2 buildings instead of 3. And then we have a long, this is kind of back to about a year ago with JFAC, when we first started making these presentations. We talked about this at last year's public hearing before we took it off the ballot and after last year's public hearing. But just giving, again, that look at the timeline as to how we arrived at the options for the major renovation, what is essentially almost an entirely new Wilkins, and they renovated Amherst Middle School. Goes into breaking down the different options we had to continue to kick the can down the road by fixing existing systems. We could renovate and refurbish, or we could build new, and that's where you get some of the numbers there. And again, these are the original numbers that we came up with the Valley Branson about a year and a half ago now. And then highlighting some of the kick the can stuff, things that need to be replaced because they're just dated systems or because our school needs more room. So you start talking about portable classrooms and the price and the cost of those. We'll do the same thing for AMS, or for Clark School as well, actually for AMS. There is a slide in there talking about the current plan for Clark School, what's going to happen to that building. Essentially, it's a lot of sit and wait. We're going to use it until the new schools are up and running, and then we'll have to take a lot of public input and work with different elements in town to figure out what the best plan for that is going to be. And again, you get into the renovate refurbish option. Whiteout's the choice for AMS. From there, I will come back in and take over and just talk about the cost of the project, where we are right now, where we started at the beginning of 2020 at about 98 million, and then where we are right now to the 83 million between those 2 projects, and then just start going through some of the designs, looking at what's the features of the new elementary school building is. We have much more detailed and much better conceptual drawings that I'll go through, talking about site plans. And then we'll do the same thing for AMS as we go through here, looking at the project, some of the things that we're going to be fixing there in the major renovation, and then looking at how the classrooms change from triangles to squares and rectangles and other shapes that are much more functional to a good school. Talk about the phasing of this project, and then we'll get into the cost one final time. I think it's important to reiterate the costs of where we started and where we are right now, and then to get into how they break down over the course of the next what it's going to be for the next 30 years. We'll talk about why we're doing both buildings at the same time. We'll talk about state building aid. And then, of course, the number that everybody is concerned about, maybe the most important slide in here, is what the tax impact is going to be on folks for the next 30 years as they are in town, monthly payments, and then we'll look at your waterfalling tax impact for the average home, starting at about 900 for that first year, or the second year technically, and then whittling down to just under 600 for that final year based on a home of about 482,000. We'll talk about solar briefly, the ROI, why it's something that we wanted to put on the ballot. I don't know that any of us had really convicted beliefs one way or the other. Yes, we have to have it, no, we don't. But after the public forums, there are a lot of people that were interested in the community, and I think we'll highlight that this is something that we thought taxpayers should have a voice in terms of the long-term functioning of these schools and climate change and being a little bit greener and being more energy efficient in our buildings. So we'll talk about that, get into the solar costs, and then just highlight the warrant articles. We'll read through those, and then that'll take us to the end. So I went through that. A lot of slides that kind of go together. Certainly, again, we'll talk about it more in depth on Tuesday night. But first thoughts, any concerns people have, any items that we want to make sure we hit on, Victoria?
Yep, so previously I had shared with the board the slides that we were working through for the community forums. This information on these slides is that information in a slightly different format. So a lot of this information you probably have already seen, even though you didn't see these slides before right now. And then if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
And I think, Victoria, if I'm not mistaken, but some of these kick the can slides, these slides were not in the public forum slides, or at least not as detailed. So this just gives a really high, a much more in-depth view as to what the different options were, what they included. You talked about it, but didn't have the slides to back it up.
Sure.
So that's why some of these add to, the depth and the length of this slide deck.
Yep, if you can go back one. Yep. So these slides have been around since last, I believe, October.
When a long time.
Yeah, it does seem like a long time. So October of 2020, when they were presented at the SAU meeting, and I think then they were subsequently presented at the Amherst school board meeting. So what I have done on this slide is altered the number of the, so this is AMS. So I've altered the number of the renovate refurbished to be the current number of our 2021.
Same thing that you did here as well.
Yep, exactly. So the, cost at Clark Wilkins, I have edited the number on build new to be the new cost of build new. What we have done, we didn't change anything else in the project. What we have done is change the scope of the project. So by changing the scope, the only number that changes on the Clark Wilkins slide is the build new. And so that's where that number comes in. But these slides have been around for a long, long time, but this is the first time to show it like this.
And I think this one, to highlight this, is I don't think that off the top of my head, I don't think the renovate refurbish number at AMS changed dramatically. I think that number was always fairly steady. But the number for the build new at Clark Wilkins went from something like 68 or 66 all the way down to 52. So that was a number that dropped dramatically. And that is why, at the time, it wasn't as much of a no-brainer, 66 million to 64 and a half. And really, that probably is a no-brainer. You're not going to just build something entirely renovated for essentially the same price as something new. But now you look at it, and it's clearly the right option to bring to the town to vote on.
Yep, exactly.
But those numbers were closer. It wasn't this entirely skewed as it looks right now.
No, it was not. But even in that case, I think it's important to note that we did not choose the most expensive option.
Correct. Anybody else? Josh?
There we go. I assume we'll get the same homework, so I'll save any English teacher comments. I don't have any.
Sure.
Yes, public ones though.
Yeah.
You kind of wants it in the IMA container.
I should have added also, we know that the formatting is not finished. This is only finished in terms of content. So don't worry, I plan for it not to look this way next week.
One question I had, when we look at the tax impact, have we considered adding kick the can tax impact comparison? Because it seems like a big tax increase until you compare it to what would the tax increase be if we just kept maintaining our current facilities. So that comparison, I'm wondering if that might be helpful and calculable.
I question, the only reason I question that, Josh, is because at that point, we're going to be serving two masters. We're going to be continuing to fund a capital reserve fund, which is going to, not that I'm trying to skew numbers by any means, but I think inevitably at the end, the numbers look even more diverse or even in a wider disparity, because you're still funding the CRF. So we're going to have a few million in there. We're going to take off, if you look at the budget slides, what, 3 million over the course of the next few years. You're going to be taking that money out of unassigned fund balance while also asking for a bond. So I don't know that it's an apples to apples comparison. But again, it's also a way that you're going to be saving money in theory too, because you're going to be funding it through unassigned fund balance, but you certainly drag out that process as well. Victoria?
Yep. I think it's also important to note that the kick the can option isn't just about dollars, it's also about the theory and philosophy behind it. So the kick the can option places a lot of portables at our schools. As a board, we've discussed the desire to not fix our space problems with portables. So if you're showing all of these numbers and everything else, I agree with sharing the information, I just don't know if at the bond hearing is the right time to share that.
Sure.
Versus like a community forum type of.
That makes sense, and I think I agree, having those numbers or thinking about those numbers might be when we're having conversations with the community, potentially helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And I think we have the high level, we do have the overall numbers too, it's 30 million in Clark Wilkins, because you gotta replace all the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, you have the portables that would need to be rented. And even if you're only at half of those, it's still 6 million for trailers. That lose value and are hard to get. I assume they're still hard to get, right? Yes.
I don't know that I have anything else immediately. I mean, I think, like you said, we've seen a lot of this in the public forums. This is sort of a more formal version, I guess, of that. So I think public forums have been great. Hopefully this will be a place where people can come, who might not come to the public forums to learn more about it. I think we're all, given the state of the public forums, and confident in this presentation.
So Josh, to your point about the kick the can costs and stuff like that, I mean, yeah, we don't have the exact, tax impact, but, we know that it's 30,000 for one building, about 30,000 for the other buildings, so it's 60,000, million. 30 million, so that's 60 million. So I think that, we're able to do a little bit of brain thinking there on it, and just talking about that. But like Victoria said, that also doesn't get us to that philosophical aspect of, and really, yeah, the board's talked about it, but I know the community has voiced their opinion on portables as well, the lack of safety in them, but it also, there's additional costs that are added to that aren't really in here, because we have two different buildings as part of buildings, and being able to consolidate that, consolidates maintenance, different aspects of that. So.
And yeah, it goes back to it's a different, whether it's maybe it's on a different funding mechanism, but it's certainly a different construction element too. I mean, if you're going to do major renovations, you need to be able to move people around and everything still. So then you lose that efficiency of combining schools. And then the question is, do you bond this? Do you wait 5 years to attempt to bond this and use the unassigned fund balance for the time being and capital reserve fund? So I don't know that it's an apples to apples comparison. And I think at this point we've committed to presenting this. I think down the road maybe that's a good option to have, but I think we have the overall numbers in there, so you can probably assume that this is 3/4 of the total. It won't be exact, but you can know that you're probably looking at 3/4 of the tax impacts of what it would be with the whole bond. I certainly don't think it'd be half, but I also don't think it'd be 90% of it either. But that's some very rough napkin math.
Napkin math is good too.
Victoria?
Something else that I think is important to note is that the community forums, public forums, are going to continue. So in January, we have one on, I believe it's Saturday the 22nd in the evening. And then we have one again in February and one again in March. And we're also, we've created in about the less than a month, we've created an Instagram account to be able to share out from a JPAC perspective. We've been able to share out the reasons why and some facts. And we've gone from, I think, like 30 people when we first started that first week to over 175. So hopefully there's a lot of knowledge floating around in the community about this, and people will come out for both the bond hearing and the public forums to ask the questions that we have the answers to. We just need to ask us to be able to share it.
Yeah, it's January 22nd, February 15th, and then I believe we have them right before voting day on Saturday, March 5th as well. So, there's a couple of Saturdays in there to be able to reach folks that may not be able to make it down in the weeknight. And those are Zoomed live, and then we also have the question and answer function enabled on those. So if you do have questions, you can send those in, and we'll be able to answer those live as well. When it comes to questions for next week, I can, as chair, I don't mind fielding the questions. If I know the answer, I'll be more than willing to give it, but I may turn it off to a subject matter expert down the line if we have something that needs to. And that would also include as well, Mr. Steele, to lead you in there so you're prepared.
Consider myself prepared.
So with that, if you want to send over again for the bond hearing, if you want to get those to Victoria's Friday, good for that as well with you.
Yep.
Obviously, we'll take a look at it for the grammar and the English teacher stuff as well. But really focusing on the content to make sure it hits everything that we want it to hit in there, which I think it does. And again, nice job by Victoria and Amy working with her to put that together and make it easily digestible and certainly appealing to be able to present that on Tuesday night.
Huge thank you to Amy for giving up a lot for vacation.
Yes. And if I'm not giving enough credit where it's due, Amy, I apologize. Victoria said she did it all. She didn't mention it, so that's why.
She did most of it. Absolutely.
All right, so with that, go ahead.
Yeah, one slight thing that I want to bring to your attention, there was a modest adjustment to the default. So maybe look back to
Yep.
that presentation. I think it would be best for the board to move the new article to public hearing, since there was the modification to take out the fuel cost projection out of the default that was inadvertently added to the default.
This one right here, Amy?
No, I go actually to the warrant article, which is 5.4.
Slide 4.
So the budget is the same, but the default
Okay.
decreased by the amount of the fuel cost projection.
Okay.
So just like we can't have the increase in transportation contract, we can't have anything associated with the transportation contract.
Okay.
As an increase.
So that is something for FY23, which is the budget we're talking about here. So by June of 2023, if we will have to find funds if gas prices continue to rise and stabilize where they are at this point, if they don't go higher.
And if the warrant doesn't pass,
Correct.
during default, then we'll have to
Yep.
somehow find those funds elsewhere.
And actually, I should word it, that's the way I should word it. If the budget passes, we'll have money set aside in there, but if it doesn't pass, then we'll have to figure out where it's gonna come from out of the default.
So for both the fuel increase as well as the increase in the fuel cost contract.
So I will take a motion to accept the new Article 14, revising default budget numbers to reflect the change in transportation and excess fuel costs being removed out of that default budget. Beth with a motion, take a second. And a second from Josh, all in favor? Aye, that's 4 and nobody opposed. So we will accept that new default budget of $31,169,908 as revised in Article 14.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have any further questions on the budget presentation, what we're doing next week? So it's Tuesday night at 6 o'clock, and then it is Wednesday night from 5 to 7. Okay, so with that, I will open it up for a second round of public comments. If anybody has any comments they'd like to address to the board, they can have the microphone now. Seeing none, I will, yes, feel free to come right up to the microphones if you don't mind.
I'm just gonna turn it on.
If you don't mind just saying your name and your town of residence, and then you will have 3 minutes on the clock.
Hi, I'm Diane Layton. I live at 3 Green Road in Amherst. I just wanted to clarify, because I'm new to this. If your proposed bond does not pass, then what happens?
Then essentially go back to the drawing board.
Okay. And what do you think the chances are that it will pass?
I wouldn't begin to venture a guess.
Okay.
I'm optimistic. I think that it's researched and it's well presented, and I think it's cost efficient and cost conscious, but honestly, I have no idea.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Sure. All right, seeing no other public comments, I will take a motion to adjourn tonight. I have a motion for Victoria. I get a second. From Beth, all in favor at 6:46 of adjourning tonight? 4 yeses and 0 noes. We are adjourned.